Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a big welcome to today's Training for Hiking live Q&A. As always, my name is Rowan Smith. I'm the founder of Summer Strength, and I specialize in helping hikers get fit, strong, and resilient to start to conquer their adventures. Now, what these Q&As are all about is basically it's an open Q&A for anyone who is curious about learning about training for hiking. So if you are on this live, if you have any questions you want to learn about, you can pop them in chat and I will happy to have a chat through in as much depth as you like. Now, around that, I typically have a few different topics and different questions that have been sent through prior to this, which I tend to cover. And then on top of that, in amongst it all, once we're through all the questions, then I will do a little bit of open course creation, where I give you a little bit of an inside look in regards to the new breathing training for hiking course that I'm putting together, which is all about respiratory muscle training for hikers and essentially strength training for your breathing muscles. So if anyone is on this live now or moving forward, feel free just to basically pop up in the chat. Happy to answer any questions and we'll go on there. But as usual, I do have a few little questions that have been sent through prior to this and a few things I want to cover, which we'll get into it. Now, first of all, what we're going to cover is a little bit of a home strength workout for hikers. And this is a new blog article I put together, which details a bit of a home strength workout, which can be a really good option for any hiker who is just trying to train and they want a new option to develop their strength for the trail. If you're on my newsletter, I did send this out on Wednesday to a few people to have a look through. If you're not on my newsletter, haven't seen it before, this is a new blog article that is back. So essentially, I'm going to talk you through each of the exercises individually to start, and then I will talk you through how the workout comes together. So essentially, the whole idea around this workout is it's going to be a simple home workout. You can do this with a backpack, or you can do this with dumbbells or barbells at the gym if you prefer. But the beauty of this particular workout, it's short and it's sweet. It's only going to take you about 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how quickly you go through. But it does cover a lot of bases for you. It'll essentially cover strength and endurance through the quads, the hamstrings, the calves, and the shoulders. So getting a lot of bases covered there, which is really good. Now, anytime we develop strength through the calves, it's going to be really useful for ankle and foot stability. For any time we develop strength through the quadriceps and the hamstrings and the calves, that's going to be really good for knee stability. And anytime we develop strength through the glutes, that's going to be really good for your hips. So it also helps with a lot of areas which a lot of people do struggle with. And then on top of that, it also does have a little bit of mobility and range of motion for the hips. And a lot of hikers do have some restrictions here, so this can be quite useful. So with that being said, let's go through the exercise and talk you through one by one. Now, first of all is an exercise that's called the front foot elevated split squat. So essentially this one is a variation on the traditional split squat, which can be a nice progression and a decent challenge. Now, what this involves is basically you've got one foot on a step or on a box or something like that. And then essentially what we're doing is we're coming straight down, straight up. A really good challenge for the quadriceps and for the glutes. Now, you will notice if you're doing this compared to a traditional split squat, when we're coming all the way down and we've got that extra range of motion, it just does add a reasonable amount of extra challenge. You may realize that, wow, like that last little inch or two is really tough. It can be very valuable. Now, in this particular variation that I'm showing, we're doing a Zercher hold. Now, essentially what Zercher means is when we're holding a weight, whether it's a barbell or even a dumbbell or pack in this case, just in the crooks of our elbows around the belly. Now, this is just a nice variation just to get introduced to this particular exercise, because essentially what it will do is when you're holding the weight at the front, it'll just force you to stay a little bit more upright. Sometimes if we've got the weight on our back, it can be really good, but it'll just tip us over. And sometimes when we're learning this exercise, it can be a little bit tricky. So that's exercise number one, can be a really good option. Now, exercise number two is the high pull. And the video has been a little bit funny on this vlog, but I'll show you over here. Now, the high pull is an interesting exercise which works the shoulders as well as a little bit of hamstrings and glutes. So essentially what you're doing here, you've got a pack in a hand, you're coming down into like almost a deadlift position where the hips are pushed back, you've loaded up the hamstrings, loaded up the glutes, and from there we're basically pushing straight up and then bring the elbows up nice and high. So you're going to go down and up in all sort of one fluid movement. Now, this is a bit of a different exercise than a lot of people would do because typically this has a little bit more momentum than the typical strength training. And you may be aware that a lot of the time when I talk about strength training for hikers, I talk about keeping things slow and controlled and really slowing things down. For this particular exercise, we are actually using a little bit more momentum, and that's what we want. Now, for this one, it can be quite variable, quite flexible in the sense is if you do load this up, challenging heavy, it can be a good strength exercise. Alternatively, if you just have it light and do quite quick repetitions, actually can be a decent cardio exercise. If you're just doing like circuit training in the gym or whatever it may be. But in our respects, in this situation, we kind of load it up with a bit of weight, so it is a bit of a challenge. You can feel a bit of a burn going through. Now, the third exercise of this particular workout is an isometric calf raise. So most hikers are pretty aware of calf raises. You know, they're tried and true. They're very, very good for developing strength through the calves, and you've probably done a million of those before. Now, essentially, an isometric calf raise is essentially doing this, but what we're doing is we're just holding the top position of the movement. So I'm not actually going down and up, but we're holding this top position. Now, the idea behind this is quite often when people go through calf raises, is the top position tends to be where we're weakest through this movement. And the top position tends to be where it's like the hardest bit of the movement. So a lot of us, when we're doing calf raises, will go down and up and down and up and down and up, but we'll end up kind of rushing through that top position. Can be a little bit tricky, or not tricky, but can just sort of lose a little bit out of the exercise. So the beauty of this isometric calf raise is we're literally just sitting in that position. We're strengthening that up that area. Can be really, really good. Now, to make this one a little bit more easy for yourself, you can always just do this with body weight, or you can even do this 2 legs at a time. If you do want to make it a bit harder, you can load up a bit of extra weight. Now, the next exercise that you're going to work through is the frog stretch. Now, the frog stretch is a great exercise just for mobility through the hips, the upper groin, and this and that. Very, very, very simple. This is like the old COVID video, which I filmed way back when, so quality is not amazing in my old living room, but it does the job. But essentially what we're doing here is we've got our knees relatively wide. What we're doing is just sort of sinking into this, and we're just basically pushing the knees out as far as we can comfortably go. It's not an intense stretch. You don't want to absolutely push it super, super hard, but we're just sinking into it, pushing the knees out as we're going through. Very, very simple, but very, very effective. And then essentially the last exercise of this particular workout is what's known as the Chinese plank. Now, this is an interesting exercise in the sense that a lot of hikers, particularly when they're training from home, they do struggle to get a little bit of strength through the hamstrings. It's really, really easy to train the quadriceps and the glutes, doing lunges and squats and things like that. The hamstrings on the back of the legs can sometimes be a little bit difficult to train. This Chinese plank is a really, really good option, which doesn't require any equipment, which actually works that. So essentially what you're doing here, very, very simple. You're essentially just going to be in a sort of bridge position. But what we're going to do is have our legs relatively long. And you can even go a bit longer than I did in this particular exercise here. And essentially all we're doing is just holding this position and driving our heels down into the floor. You'll notice pretty quickly this works the hamstrings quite a bit, and you will get a good burn through the hamstrings. Works out pretty well. So those are our 5 exercises what we got. The Chinese plank, the frog stretch, the isometric calf raise, the high pull, and then that front foot elevated split squat. So essentially what the workout works out to be, very, very, very straightforward. You're going to start with that front foot elevated Zercher split squat. You're going to do about 8 to 10 repetitions on each leg, really aiming to keep about a 3 to 4 second on the way down and maybe 1 second on the way up. Nice and slow, nice and controlled. Then essentially you're going to go straight into the high pull. So you're going to grab that pack, you're going to go 15 of those high pulls. This one can be, as I said before, use a bit of momentum, be a little bit quicker, you can kind of push that. The next one is doing the isometric calf raise. Now for this one, you can just do as long as you can hold, basically. For some people, this may be like 15, 20 minutes or something like that. Not 20 minutes, 15, 20 seconds. That's totally fine, like if that. Alternatively, if you can get up to 45 seconds, 60 seconds, whatever it may be, that can be really good. And then finally, you end up doing your frog stretch, and you do that for about 60 seconds. So the idea behind this is you do your split squats, you do your high pulls, you do your calf raise, you do your frog stretch. Now, essentially, instead of resting in between exercises, what we're doing is we're alternating between the lower body, upper body, lower limb, and then stretch. So we're working different areas of the body. So technically, we don't really need a rest period. This stretch of this 60 seconds is where you kind of get your breath back and this and that. And by the time you get back to this, the legs should be fresh and ready to roll. Now, essentially what you're going to do here is you're going to do this whole sequence about 3 to 4 times. No real rest because you're not resting between exercises. This is where you're catching your breath. You just work through that about 3 to 4 times. Once you've done that, then you can move down into that Chinese plank we showed before. For this one, you can just do as long as you can, hold it, just hold that position, hang out there, feel the hamstrings burn, do as long as you can for this for, You may get up to 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 60 seconds. Some people can do minutes at a time. That's totally fine. Do this once, have about a 40-second rest, and then do it again. Second time round, you probably won't be able to hold it quite as long. And that's basically the workout. Like it ends up covering, as we sort of said, a lot of different bases as you go through. It's very, very time efficient. It'll only take you about 20 to 30 minutes, but it can work really, really well. Now, a couple of things just to wrap this one up before I move on. For this front foot elevated split squat, this is a really, really good exercise, but for a lot of hikers, this may just be a little bit too much. So if this is a little bit too much, the way to make this a bit easier is you can start with just body weight and just see how that feels. Or alternatively, you can kind of go down just to a normal body weight split squat, where you basically just don't have that elevated front foot, but you can just work through this. And if this is too hard for you, you can even use it as supported. So you can hold a couple of trekking poles, hold onto a chair, or whatever it may be. Works out pretty well. Now, for this workout, how to typically look at it is I'd sort of use this once a week. On the second once a week, and repeat that once a week for maybe 4 weeks. I would typically complement this with a second strength workout through the week, so something that's going to work those other muscles. So if we did a split squat here, which works quadriceps and glutes, maybe do something that's going to be predominantly hamstrings, and the second workout, so maybe a single-legged deadlift or something like that, and then just work complementary exercises for the other ones in your second strength workout. And I would sort of say do that 4 weeks in a row or something, and then move on to something else. Very, very simple workout, but you can kind of check it out there. Now, if anyone was interested in trying that workout out, I'll share the link for that blog article just in the chat, and you can basically check that out for yourself. Cool. So that is the first thing I wanted to cover, and hopefully those links are going through. Okay, perfect. They've all gone through. So next up, and I want to say anyone watching live, if you do have any questions you'd like covered, feel free to post up in the chat. Happy to talk about absolutely anything. More than welcome on that. But in the meantime, let's move into the first question I sort of want to cover today. And this was about trekking poles. And this actually come from one of our clients, and they were asking about this on our weekly gear Q&A or fortnightly gear Q&A, but I thought it was worthwhile covering publicly because it's an interesting topic. So essentially what we are talking about is trekking poles. And the question was basically like, hey, I'm a little bit curious about trekking poles and hiking poles and their value on flat ground. Because I often sort of say, hey, I really like hikers using hiking poles. They can be really, really useful for going up and down hills. A lot of people are aware of that. But then sometimes on the flats, do we really need them? That's the big question. And, we can sort of talk through it. So when it comes down to anything like that, it's probably worthwhile just taking a step back and just looking at all the particular benefits of what we're looking with this type of stuff. Realistically, when it comes down to trekking poles, there's a few specific benefits you can't get out of these. When it comes down to downhills, uphills, flats, and rough terrain. Now, on the downhills, this is probably where trekking poles come into their own. And they're probably the most benefit in this situation, is basically taking pressure off the knees. So many hikers out there struggle with knee pain while hiking. It's such a common thing. And so many hikers struggle with knee pain on steep descents. Now, trekking poles can take a lot of pressure off your knees when you're going downhill. There's a lot of studies behind this. It's very, very significant. And this is one of the most simple things you can do to take pressure off your knees. That's a big, big benefit for a lot of hikers out there. On top of that, even if you don't have knee pain, trekking poles can improve your stability and balance going down hills. A lot of the time when we're going down steep descents, we've got steps or whatever it may be. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky and we're like, oh, you know what, this is a little bit too much for me. Trekking poles can just help us stabilize. We all know that's pretty common sense. Now, on the flip side, when we're looking at uphills, where trekking poles can help us is essentially they can potentially improve our movement efficiency. So this kind of comes into two areas. Number one, there have been some studies to show that using trekking poles when you're going up steep hills, they can reduce a rate of perceived exertion and rate of perceived effort. Meaning they've compared someone going up a hill without poles and going up a hill with poles, and the general consensus is it actually just feels a little bit easier when you've got poles. This is probably from just getting the upper body moving, using a little bit more, getting that doing some of the work and just helping us not have to completely rely on legs. And also, we can probably get in a bit more rhythm going uphill, makes sense. On top of that, they can potentially reduce our energy expenditure on a sense. So the rate of perceived exertion just means it feels easier. Reducing energy expenditure is actually really significant, meaning we actually use less energy going up hills, which is a really, really significant thing. Now, I will sort of say this one is potentially. I think there was like, when I was sort of looking at it previously, I think there was only like really one very small study that had actually shown this. Whether there's more studies out these days or whether there's more comes into it, it's a potential benefit, but either way, it's going to make your uphills feel a bit easier. So that's great. Now, when it comes down to the flat, realistically, downhills, uphills, a lot of good benefits. When it comes down to flat, there's some specific things for specific people. Now, for trekking poles, one thing it can do on the flats is reduce swollen fingers or what's known as sausage fingers. Not everyone gets this, but some people do. Essentially, if we're just walking, hiking, some people get what we call sausage fingers, where basically the fingers just swell up. If you're wearing rings or anything like that, it gets really uncomfortable, and you end up just having literally sausages for fingers. My wife gets it. It's really funny. Every time we walk, not much fun. Now, trekking poles, if you do struggle with this, can be a really, really simple solution in the sense that when we're going on the flats and the hands are just swinging by the sides, the trekking poles just keep the arms moving a little bit more, keep them up a little bit higher, can reduce this very, very simply. Very, very simple, but can make a bit of a difference. Number two, it can support your feet. So a lot of hikers struggle with foot pain, plantar fasciitis, different things like that. A lot of hikers struggle with that. If we are using trekking poles, it can take a little bit of pressure off the feet. It's not going to be a magic fix or a miracle cure or anything like that, but it can take a little bit of pressure. And if we're struggling with foot pain, any little thing helps. So that can be quite good. And it can also sometimes reduce sore neck and lower back pain. So if you ever experience this, this can sometimes be quite useful. One cause of neck pain, basically on the trail, is essentially when we're hiking, but we're not looking forward, we're just looking down on the trail. And if we're just doing this for half an hour or an hour, it's usually not that big a deal. But if we're doing this for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 hours and we're spending the majority of the time just looking down on the trail, that can sometimes be a little bit uncomfortable. So essentially, trekking poles will just keep us looking upright a little bit more and just naturally keep us a little bit more, can help with the neck. On top of that is if you do have lower back pain, another thing is if we are tipped over all day, and even if we got a pack on our back, adds a little bit of extra weight, that can sometimes put a bit of stress on the back. So again, the poles just keep us a little bit more upright, can be a potential benefit there. And then rough terrain, obviously rough terrain can sometimes challenge our balance. Poles can make us feel a little bit more steady, a little bit more sturdy in those situations. And if you do have ankle issues, this can sometimes be good as well. If you're the type of person who rolls their ankle all the time, poles can often help. So, with that being said, those are the particular benefits of what we're looking at this. Realistically, going back to the question, should I be using it on flat ground or whatever it may be? Typically for trekking poles, if you're doing a hike which has lots of up and down or rough terrain, I would typically say most people would recommend that in most situations. Goes a long way, a lot of benefits, really, really useful. When you look at the more flat hikes, I would sort of say if you struggle with the swollen or sausage fingers, if you have foot pain, or if you get a sore neck or a lower back, it may be worthwhile bringing them, and may be worthwhile using them, even on the flatter hikes. Alternatively, if you don't struggle with any of these things, you probably don't need them. It can be good just to have them, just to get used to them as part of this, but if you don't particularly enjoy it on the flat terrain, then you probably don't need them. So just make that decision for yourself. Do I struggle with any of these things? Will I benefit from any of this stuff? If not, who cares? It should be all good. So you make your decision off that. So with that being said, that's everything on the trekking poles. Before I move into my next question, if anyone watching live does have any questions they would like covered, anything they're curious about, anything they want to learn about in the subject of training for hiking, feel free to pop it in the chat and I'm happy to talk through. Look, with that being said, I've got a couple of other things I want to cover. Beg pardon, and a couple of other questions that have sort of come up. So the next question was actually training for a specific trip. And basically what this question was, I think 2 people asked this week in all honesty. And they were sort of saying, hey, I've got a trip coming up for the Inca Trail over in Peru. Go do Machu Picchu. Awesome. What should I be doing to prepare? And yeah, they were just curious about what they should be doing. So realistically, whenever we're looking at a specific trip and we're like, hey, what should I be doing with my training? Realistically, the best place to start for no matter what trip you're doing is just taking a step back and just looking at the overarching demands of the trip. And just think, what have I actually got to prepare for? What are the biggest challenges for this trip? What do I need to keep in mind when I'm looking at my training? Now, when we're looking at the Inca Trail specifically, the 3 biggest demands for this, there's obviously lots of different bits and pieces that goes into it, but the biggest demands is number 1, multiple days of hiking. So going day after day after day, depending on how long the trip goes. Obviously, we've got to deal with that. Number two is high altitude. This is a high altitude hike. This will be something you need to be aware of, and something you need to consider. Even if it's not quite as high as, say, Kilimanjaro or something, it is still high altitude and it can affect you. And then on top of that is also lots of steps and stairs. So this is something that does trip up a lot of people in the sense they do a lot of preparation, they do a lot of training, and then they realize, oh my gosh, there's a lot of stepping here, and it sometimes catches people up. So that probably the three biggest demands of this particular trip. There's obviously lots of other individual circumstances. If you struggle with knee pain or foot pain or whatever it may be, all of that individual stuff you need to be aware of. But they're kind of the biggest demands. So when we're looking at the training side of things, there's a few things that I typically recommend that it's as a really, really, really basic overview. Now, on the hiking side of things, preparing for multiple days of hiking. Typically, the way I like to get my hikers to prepare, and typically what I recommend when it comes down to this, is what you want to do is just basically build up to being confident with two metrics. You want to be confident that you can do your longest day in hours on the trip and while wearing the heaviest pack weight you expect on the trip. And I say this for pretty much any hiking trip you're going on. So if you're considering the Inca Trail or if you booked on, you want to go and look at your trip notes. And you want to find the longest day of the trip in hours and however long that's going to be. Is it going to be 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, whatever it may be. And then you want to get a rough estimate of what your heaviest pack weight will be. Now, typically the Inca Trail is not going to be a full pack. It usually is like more of a day pack situation, but depending on the trip you do, may depend. So once you've figured those two things out, essentially what you want to make sure is you want to be able to do a full day hike, which covers those two things. What I typically recommend is basically aiming to do this day hike with these two metrics about 2 to 3 weeks before you fly it. So if you were sort of saying, hey, my longest day on the trip is 6 hours and my heaviest pack weight is going to be 6 kilos, 2 weeks before the trip, you want to do equals 1 times day hike for 6 hours at 6 kg. That's kind of what you want to be hitting for before you go. And then essentially once you figure that out, then you essentially just look at the months ahead and you reverse engineer your training hikes from there. And you essentially say, okay, in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 months, I need to be ready for this. I'm here right now. How am I going to build myself up? And that's when you create a training hiking plan to slowly build your way up. That's typically what we want to be looking on the hiking side of things. You may be looking at this and be like, oh, Rowan, like a couple of things, like why are you saying hours as opposed to like distance and elevation? The reason for hours is basically not everyone will have access to all the hiking trails. Some people will have lots and lots of elevation going up and down. Some people will only have flat elevation. Some people have a mixture. Realistically, when it comes down to hours, if you're planning out this, it lets you vary around that. So if you're going on a big elevation hike with lots and lots of up and down, you may not get through quite as much distance, but if you do 6 hours of that, that's going to be solid. Alternatively, if you're doing a really, really flat one, you may end up doing way more distance, but it'll end up being 6 hours. So it ends up being, a decent level up. Now, if you're in the situation you really, really, really prefer to be doing distance and elevation, that's totally fine. It's not a big deal, but that's what I typically recommend. The other thing you may be thinking of, okay, Ron, I need to prepare for 4, 5, 6 days of hiking, whatever it may be. But you're only saying do a day hike. What's that all about? Realistically, if you want to do multiple of these things in a row, you can. But I've found over the years that as long as we can get to this as a day hike, and plus do the rest of your training right, this typically gets us where we need to be. I have most of my hikers, in all honesty, don't even do overnighters or multi-dayers when they're preparing for these trips. They'll literally just hit these metrics and they tend to be good to go. That's my experience, at least. So that's the hiking side of things. Next up, let's talk about high altitude. So high altitude, big factor when it comes down to this type of stuff. If you do have access, if you live somewhere where you have access to high altitude, absolutely go right ahead, get some altitude exposure. It will go a long way. Alternatively, if you don't have access, if you live in a country or live in an area where you don't have any big mountains, that's fine. Typically, when it comes down to high altitude, you just want to make sure you are building out your aerobic capacity as much as you can. Lots of training hikes, lots of pack walks, cycling, swimming, whatever it may be. Lots and lots and lots of low intensity cardio. Building up that conditioning goes a really, really long way. On top of that, you want to make sure that you are practicing fueling and hydration when you're doing these long sessions. One of the biggest factors at altitude, or one of the major factors at altitude, we go to altitude, we're expending all this energy hiking. At high altitude, we are expending more energy because we're up in this high altitude environment. On top of that, our appetite tends to go down in this environment. So there's a massive mismatch in regards to energy and fuel, which can get a lot of people into trouble. So essentially, you just want to make sure you are practicing fueling and hydration during your training so it's a little bit more natural when it comes into it. And then on top of that, you also want to be just thinking, okay, how many days can I spend in Glasgow before the trip? And basically spend as much time as possible and get a little bit of pre-acclimatization there. If your itinerary just doesn't work out, you can't spend a lot of time there. It's doable. It's not ideal, but it's doable. But the more time you can spend there, the better. Now, that's a really, really brief thing in regards to a high altitude. If you did want to learn a little bit more about training for a high altitude hike specifically, I'll share this video. Where are we? How to train for high altitude hiking. Basically, this particular video goes into a lot more detail for this type of stuff. It is 50 minutes talking specifically about high altitude hiking. It can be a decent option for you. So anyone watching this and wants to check it out, I'll pop it in the chat. If you are on YouTube, by the way, to see these things that I'm sharing, you probably need to go to your chat. There'll be a little section that says top chat, and you just need to change that to live chat. And basically what that would do is it'll show you all the stuff that goes in the chat as opposed to just a few random messages. Same thing for Facebook. If you're watching on Facebook, you probably need to, I can't remember exactly what it says, but there's like show all comments or something like that, just so you can actually see what I'm popping up there. So I just shared the video and you can check that out. Next up, when it comes down to preparing for, we sort of said steps and stairs catches a lot of people out. So strength training, absolute must, so relevant for so many hikers out there, and such a necessity when it comes down to this. Realistically, strength training will go a long way to helping you with those steps, both up and down, keeping the body safe, reducing the risk of aches and pains, helping you just feel more comfortable. Realistically, what you want to be looking at is just making sure you are following a full body plan. So not just doing a few squats and lunges and this and that, but something that will work your hamstrings, your quads, your glutes, your calves, covering everything, basically. And on top of that, something that will progress over time. So you're not just doing the same thing over and over and over and over, but you are basically building things up over time. Now, if you're not sure about how to go about that, and you're not sure about how to get started with strength training or anything like that, I do have a little thing for you. A lot of you may have come across before. I have a little free mini course around strength training for hikers, where it basically just sort of teaches you how to put together a few beginning workouts for yourself. So it'll talk you through the specific benefits of strength training for hiking if you want to get involved with that. It'll talk you through some of the principles of effective strength training around how to get the most out of strength training, and also just give you some simple advice around how to create your own strength workouts. And you'll essentially come out the other end, just have been able to put together 2 simple workouts which you can do at home. Now, this is pretty basic. It's not an advanced course or anything like that, but if you haven't explored strength training for hiking before, it's very useful. So again, I'll pop a link in each of the chats. You can check that out and see if you did need some extra direction on that, you can find it there. And then finally, last thing you want to make sure is just making sure you are fitting in some stairs and some hills. In the sense we said, going up and down stairs can be tough on the trail. Stair and hill training is going to go a long way. Ideally, you want to be making sure you are getting in some outdoor stuff. So if you can get access to a nice long set of stairs outdoors or a nice long hill outdoors, ideally do that. The reason I say that is if you're doing sort of a real set of stairs, you will get both going up, but also going down. And it is just as important at training the body going down if you have options for that. Alternatively, if you're like, look, realistically, I do not have access to anything like that, that happens. Then basically you just need to look at what you can do. Focus on going up through maybe the Stairmaster, the step machine, step ups. If you don't have if you have access to a gym, hopefully you have access to one of those. If you don't have access to a gym, doing step ups off like a bench or a box or something like that can work out pretty well. That can prepare you for the way up. And then essentially, if you don't have any natural hills to go down on, then you're basically just going to have to lean into the strength training more. And that can often bridge the gap in regards to getting you ready for those descents. So making sure you're nailing that. And if you can string together this hiking, end up hitting that metric, making sure you are covering that altitude stuff, get some steps and stairs into your training. and some strength training, that can really, really go a long way. And that's typically the approach I'll usually take for people training for the Inca Trail. In a nutshell, those are the main things that I typically aim for. You may be looking at this and be like, well, that's pretty similar to what I recommend for most hikers, and that is true. It's just honing in on the specifics of the trip. So making sure we are getting some stairs in one way or another, making sure some of our strength training is relevant for the movements we're going to be looking at, making sure we are hitting the metrics for our specific trip, and making sure we're just aware of that high altitude environment as well. All of that very, very, very important, but definitely will go a long, long way. So with that being said, that's enough on that particular topic. As I said before, if anyone watching live has any questions, feel free to plug in the chat. Happy to answer anything you may want. All right. So one more question I wanted to cover on this, fueling for long sessions. So this is kind of something that came up just this week with a new client, and I think it's worthwhile talking about because it's a topic which it doesn't really get talked about a lot, but some people fall into it. Essentially, the question was, or the situation was, I like to spend about 2 to 3 hours per day training or at the gym. But sometimes, I just get a bit low on energy, get a bit hungry during the sessions. What should I be doing? First things first, I will sort of say, if you're a hiker, if you're a trekker, if you're a mountaineer, you don't need to be training 2 to 3 hours per day. It's not a necessity. It's not 100%. You don't need it. You can do much, much, much shorter sessions. However, there are some people in here in the situation where they really, really enjoy their training. They enjoy being in that environment for a certain amount of time. They have a social circle here. Maybe they have all the time in the world. They just like to do this. And that's totally fine in your situation. However, when it comes down to these longer sessions, we need to be aware of how we're managing our energy, how we're managing our fueling. Because when it comes down to it, nutrition is a major, major, major factor for energy. When it comes down to short sessions, if you're looking at 30-minute sessions, 45-minute sessions, even 60-minute sessions, you can probably get away with minimal thought on nutrition. You can definitely enhance your results and enhance your performance by putting attention into nutrition, but a lot of people get away with not even thinking about it. However, when we are getting to these longer sessions, we need to be much more thorough here. We need to have a lot more thought. Because if we don't, we run the risk of just getting really low energy, just getting fatigued, and just not getting as much out of these sessions as we would like. Now, typically when we're talking of longer sessions in the hiking world, in the hiking community, we often think about hiking because that's why we usually do longer sessions. And you'll often hear me sort of saying, okay, the way we manage this when we're hiking is we just want to snack and eat to compensate. That's a normal part of our hiking. A lot of people do it. And I'll usually tell hikers that every hour or two, have something to eat, have a bite or two, and that can go a long way. And that's just sort of natural thinking for hikers, and that's pretty easy. But if we're in this situation where we're doing like training at the gym and we're spending all this time actually just doing normal training, a lot of people will often neglect this and they won't even think about nutrition and they don't really put the two situations similar, but we definitely want to get it right. So when it comes down to this, you want to make sure you get your nutrition right. There's 3 areas you want to consider here when it comes down to long sessions and how you want to figure things out. So we want to think about refueling, so what we're putting in our body before training. We want to talk about intra-workouts, what we're doing during training, and we want to think about post-workout, what we're doing after training. So pre-fueling, typically what you want to make sure is just, same with any type of training, enter your session fueled. We don't want to be entering our training sessions with an empty stomach. Even more so, if we're doing long, long hours in the gym, we do not want to make sure, well, we definitely don't want to make sure we have an empty stomach. If possible, perfect world, if possible, ideally aim for a well-balanced meal, like 1 to 2 hours before training. So when I say well-balanced meal, that means some carbohydrates, some fat, some protein. Carbohydrates relatively slow digesting, works out pretty well. If possible, if you're training in the afternoon, have a mid-morning meal or have a lunch or whatever it may be. That works out pretty well. A lot of people, however, this may not be possible. Maybe you're training in the morning, maybe you don't wake up so early, whatever it may be, or maybe for you, you just feel like food takes longer to digest. So in that situation, you just want to make sure you are still getting in something at least. We still don't want to go in with an empty stomach. We want to get something in. So this may be a case of if you're training in the morning and waking up, it might be just having a piece of fruit, a banana, an orange or something like that. Just getting something in the body before you go. It might involve having some toast or a bagel or white wrap, something that's relatively quick to digest that, again, can give us those carbohydrates that we want before training, but it's not going to take too long to digest. Or if you're like, hey, this is really, really tricky, I just cannot deal with this, then you can look at liquid calories. So the idea behind liquid calories is they tend to be a little bit quicker to digest just because they're liquid and the body doesn't have to break them down so much. And also sometimes they can just be a little bit more bearable in the morning. So liquid calories could be like a smoothie, or could be like a sports drink, electrolyte supplement. So on the smoothie side of things, if you were doing this, you may make a smoothie the night before, have it sitting in the fridge, and then wake up in the morning, just sip it as you go through. You don't have to have a full serving or a massive smoothie, but it might just be a simple way of just getting a little bit more into you. Alternatively, you could sort of look at a sports drink or electrolyte supplement. You could sort of look at, okay, whatever I take for my hiking, which has carbohydrates in it, I can have some of that. That's kind of what it's designed for because it's easy to digest. We'll just get a bit of fuel in. For me, at the moment, I'm going through a period where I'm training at 5 a.m. each morning, which is tough getting in the morning. The sessions I'm doing are relatively difficult. I need food in, but I've got to have that balance between not feeling gross and whatever it may be. So what I'm doing is I'm waking up having a piece of toast, and I'm having a little bit of electrolytes, and that's kind of getting me through the sessions. It's a nice sort of balance with things as we come through. But have a think about that. So that's your pre-fueling. Next up, intra-fueling. If you are in this situation where you're training for long, long periods of time, you need to consider this. Realistically, if any workout is going to go over 90 minutes, you probably want something to refuel yourself during a workout. If you're doing a high intensity session and you're really, really pushing, it's very, very difficult. Probably if you're training over 60 minutes, you probably want something in that situation. However, when we are training, we need to be really, really aware of, okay, we don't want something that's just going to sit in our stomach. We don't want something that's going to make us feel gross. We don't want something that's going to pull blood away from our working muscles and force into our gut and help with digestion. We want something easy. So in these situations, when we're in the middle of training, it's the same thing when we're in the middle of hiking. We want to aim for something that's easy to digest, something that's high carbohydrate. The carbohydrates is what is going to fuel us during our training. Low fat, low protein, low fiber. So these things will be in the middle of your workout. So this might just be having some dried fruit, might be having like the sports drink or electrolyte supplement again, might even just be having some gummy bears or some snakes or something like that in the middle of a session. It really does go a long way. And if you're in the situation where you're like, okay, maybe I go to the gym, maybe I like to do 2 different gym classes in a row, and that'll take 2 hours, maybe in between the classes, just have something to bump up that energy or whatever it may be. And then finally, when we're in this situation, if you are spending multiple hours training, then you also want to be aware of, okay, what am I eating afterwards? Because if it's been so long since you've been training, and if you either haven't had a well-balanced meal, or it's been, by then like 3 or 4 hours since you've had a full meal, we kind of want to get something decent into us relatively quickly. So what you want to look at is if you're coming out the end of these long sessions, pretty quickly after, you want something that's going to be high carbohydrate, high protein. High carbohydrate to replenish those carbs, high protein to kind of help with the recovery side of things. Pretty immediately after these. If you're just training like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, you have a bit of grace period for this. But if you are training 2 to 3 hours, you probably want to have something pretty close at the end. So, this may be sort of just having like it might be a yogurt and muesli bar. It may be a case of having like a protein shake. It may be a case of having a sandwich or a wrap with some like chicken in or something like that. But something that's high carb, high protein, get that in relatively quickly. So have that waiting for you. And then, once you've had that, try to get in a full meal relatively soon. Probably coming out the end of a marathon session like that, your body, even if you pre-fueled, even if you've done intra workout, even if you just had something quick afterwards, your body's probably craving some food. So sometime in the next hour or two, get in a full meal, something with protein, fat, carbohydrates, well balanced, and get that going. So this situation is definitely not everyone will fall into it, but I know there are a lot of people out there who do like to do these extended sessions for one reason or another. And if you're going about this, you definitely want to take it seriously and get in what you can. So with that being said, that's kind of everything that I had prepared for today and everything that's sent through. I was planning on doing a bit of work, a coursework on the respiratory muscle training stuff. I was going to talk you through some getting started and talking through figuring out your resistance and some training protocol stuff. But in all honesty, got a little bit of a headache today, so I might wrap things up. So with that being said, and we can cover all that stuff next time. But with that being said, for anyone who is watching live, hope you've enjoyed today. For anyone who's watching in the future, if you do have any questions of any of the stuff I covered today, or if you do have any questions you'd like me covered in the future, feel free to reach out. Just let me know. I'm more than happy to go through things. But aside from that, hope you've enjoyed today. Hope you got a little bit out of it, and we'll talk to everyone